Chapter 78. Having a conversation with ghosts makes me feel like a crazy person, Dinah said as she sat back on the concrete ledge next to the river. She wasn't wearing her usual leather jacket and cut-up jeans. She wore a loose floral blouse tucked into high-waisted mom jeans, reminiscent of a housewife in the early 90s. Her hair was styled long and straight, with a hint of makeup that made her look like a hippie who grew up. I was sure that look was Carousel's idea. Or maybe it wasn't. I had never really known Dinah, not the Dinah who had a kid and a life before tragedy struck. It was like the difference between Sarah Connor in Terminator I and Terminator 2. I had missed out on the helpless waitress and only knew the paranoid resistance fighter. I felt like I was seeing a bit of her old self now. Normally, I tended to just accept whatever people showed me. I assumed that if I didn't try to figure them out, they wouldn't try to figure me out. It usually worked. Gail, the tall, handsome ghost who had seemingly spent time playing lovebirds with Dinah for the flashbacks to before his accidental death, looked at her with an adoration that seemed too perfect. But beneath the surface, I sensed he might have just been a charmer. Isaac leaned over to me and whispered, "Just because there are actually ghosts here doesn't mean she isn't crazy." He giggled to himself. I didn't take it as a dig at Dinah so much as a silly little retort. I would never discourage him from leaning on humor. He would need to practice whatever wit he had for future storylines. "So I woke up in 1983, the day of my wedding to Gail," Dinah said. "We took pictures, went on a bunch of dates, had a honeymoon at Snowblind, that sort of stuff. I played my part. Then Gail died," she said. I swore I heard her voice crack. "Excuse me," she said, clearing her throat. "Anyway, Carlisle guys sent a bunch of men to ransack our home. They threatened me to take a settlement and sign an NDA. They bought me a place in Snowblind to move to. They got me a job at the resort. I guess he died under suspicious circumstances, so they wanted me out of the picture. That's where my character has been for the last 8 years. Except, of course, every time that the possessing spirit came around, I started seeing Gail's spirit. Eventually, he convinced me to come back here and help put him to rest." "How romantic," I said. I got the sense that she was glossing over some things, like an explanation for how close she had seemed to the ghost when we showed up. Gail didn't pass my message along. Instead, he said, "I can regain control of my body from the spirit, but it requires a dramatic scene between myself and Dinah. We need you and your teammates to help us set it up. Do you understand?" I did understand. All in all, it was good news. Really good news. I was worried about how we were going to defeat the diecast a second time. Normally, an enemy got more dangerous when it returned from the grave to wreak havoc. But this opened up an opportunity. We weren't having a fight against the diecast like last time. We had a new way to defeat it. Dinah and Gail's love subplot was going to beat it somehow. I sure hope Dinah was prepared to cry on command. "How did you guys end up dying already?" Dinah asked. Gail said no one has to die in first blood. Was second blood that hard? Second blood was actually hard. I was thankful that I got to be dead for it. "Tell her I didn't want to die at first, but Carousel insisted," I said. I could give her a real explanation later once I had a more flattering way of describing it. Gail relayed my message and then said, "Yes, Carousel is a trickster." We talked some more about the final battle. There weren't many specific details that Gail could give. It was possible there weren't specific details to be had. Love Beats Evil is not the type of finale that is heavy on specifics. As much as I wanted to stick around and pick Gail's brain about the tutorial, a path opened up in the glowing fog. It was time to leave. When we went to go, Gail and Dinah stayed behind. She was going to find his grave. Gail said she had a scene where she mourned him. I longed for the days of old when we just all went to fight the bad guy together. Bobby, Isaac, and I wished her good luck and then went on our way. Dinah's role in the story would not be a surprise to the audience. They would have seen the love story play out so that there could be a payoff in the finale. Interestingly, Ant 1 had not seen Dinah yet. He was supposed to be Gail's best friend. Was he not at their wedding? Or Gail's funeral? Either Carousel was getting sloppy, or those scenes were all close-ups used in a montage. And one's arc began in medias res. He was informed about his past but had reenacted little of it. I had overlooked that. Dinah had actually lived a lot of her character's story. There had to be a reason for that. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that victory was not guaranteed in the final battle. If Dinah failed, Carousel was setting things up so that her entire side plot could be cut from the final movie. That's why she was kept away from us, and that's why we shared no scenes. Dinah was either going to step up and be a main character of this movie, or she would be cut from it entirely. Carousel always had its contingencies. As I walked along the foggy path, I wondered if I should develop a contingency, too. We walked for hours, maybe. All I saw were neighborhoods surrounded by glowing fog. Eventually, we reached our destination, a row of cheap houses in a bad part of town. Ramona was standing outside. She wasn't moving. She stood still with her eyes closed. She wasn't dressed the same way she had when we had met. She was dressed like some kind of wannabe rocker from the early 90s, which, technically, she was. She didn't move when we arrived. It wasn't until she heard a voice behind her that she budged at all. "Ramona?" A young girl called to her from behind. "What are you doing, Ramona, just standing there?" Her eyes opened. She took a deep breath and looked around. When she looked at the girl, she was shocked beyond belief. Then she started to cry. "Phoebe," she said softly. Ramona jumped toward the young girl and wrapped her in a hug. Phoebe Mercer. Ramona hadn't seen her in an incalculable amount of time. Phoebe Mercer. Plot armor 3. An NPC. An ordinary one at that, save for whatever meta-knowledge she was permitted to keep. My best guess from Ramona's stories was that she knew a lot, but I couldn't begin to understand how that would work with a young teenager. How long did she know about her situation? I expected Ramona to ask her sister about the storyline or the Centennial. She didn't. "Sorry," she said. "I'm just so happy to see you. Let's go inside." Phoebe played along. Isaac and I went to follow. When we did, I saw Bobby running away. He gave no explanation, but a path did open up for him, so Carousel must have been okay with whatever he was doing. Inside the Mercer apartment, things were cramped. Isaac and I barely had a place to stand. There were magazines, music equipment, textbooks, and an old television. The furniture looked like it had been through several sets of owners. It was small, but it had the touches of home. Ramona looked absolutely thrilled to see it. They talked about mundane things for a while. Ramona asked Phoebe about school and boys. Phoebe answered with an embarrassed giggle. Ramona asked her what she wanted to eat. It was macaroni and cheese. Ramona delighted in preparing a box of neon orange noodles on their tiny stovetop. Phoebe helped. "Do we just leave her here?" Isaac asked. "I mean, what else do we need to do? Why are we even being shown this? It has nothing to do with the storyline." "This is all make-believe," I said. "Ramona is playing like nothing ever happened. Phoebe is going along with it. Something must be about to happen or else Carousel wouldn't have brought us here." "What do you mean?" Isaac asked. I nodded over to the calendar on the fridge. "It's the day before the Centennial. The real day before, or as close as we'll ever get to it. Ramona ends up at the Centennial one way or another. That means sister bonding has to end. Eventually, Phoebe is to confirm for her that she is an NPC. Isaac and I watched them. They continued chatting and cooking and eating. Everything was normal, or at least they made it appear that way. I still think it's weird that we are being forced to watch it. There is an actual plot brewing out there that this is distracting us from. I shrugged. There was a tension that was unspoken. Ramona wasn't a fool. She knew she wasn't back in her old life. "We need to talk," Phoebe said eventually. "I have homework to do. A lot of it. Can't I bring it to your show at the Centennial tomorrow?" Ramona sidestepped. "I think if you have homework, you probably should stay home and work on it. It's no big deal. You've heard all my songs before." "Really, I'm not even sure I'm going to go." Phoebe looked her in the eye and said, "Ramona, you have to go. It's a big opportunity. You can't miss it. You've been working your whole life for this." Ramona froze, wide-eyed. "Phoebe," she said. "Please no." Phoebe hugged her. "Talk to me," Ramona said. Then the dam burst. "Just say something. Don't tell me you were really a part of this. Please." Phoebe didn't know what to say. I could almost see the words caught in her throat. I thought maybe she was restricted. NPCs, even ones with meta-knowledge, were restricted. Surely, she had been unable to reveal the truth to her sister for all the years they had lived before the Centennial. If the script had limited her before, it didn't now. Phoebe began to speak. She was crying and emotional, so she rushed the words out like she had been holding them in for a long time. "I was 38. A man attacked me in an elevator. I accidentally conjured our family spirit. It killed the man. The blow was so powerful that the elevator's brakes gave in and I tumbled 18 floors. I died. Years earlier, Mom died because the ghost accidentally caused a multi-car pileup after some college kid with road rage flipped her off." "What are you saying?" Ramona asked. "I remember life before coming to Carousel. Not a lot of it. Just enough. Mercers sometimes do. Maybe it's better if we know. The killer spirit we carry around probably has something to do with it. I remember when Mom died and earlier than that when Dad left. He kept waking up with unexplained bruises. Who could blame him for leaving? It was just me then. Me and Mom. You weren't there, not exactly. I remember you being my sister when we got here. You practically raised me after Mom died the second time around. Somehow, the two memories, they get all mixed together and I can't tell which is real, but..." At that point, Phoebe was crying harder. Ramona was crying. She looked dreadfully confused, but at the same time, she didn't interrupt. "Ramona, you were supposed to die 3 days after being born. That's how it happened the first time. Mom's grave was right beside yours. I remember seeing it every time I visited her to pay respects. I brought you lilacs. The poltergeist accidentally killed you when you were young back before Carousel. That's why you don't fit in. Somehow, you didn't die. When they folded our world into this one, you lived. When they bring in a new world, they don't just bring in the living. They bring in everyone from that storyline, Ramona. They bring in everyone who will be born. Descendants, everything they will need. Every single person is accounted for. Mr. Dearcon told me. The new souls. Carousel won't create life. It refuses. It's only willing to borrow them, and when it brought the Mercers over, everyone thought that things would be the same. The same? Ramona asked. You die. I'm born. Dad leaves. Mom dies. I die in an elevator 20 years from now. Just like the first time. That was how it was supposed to be. Every person brought here follows the pattern they would have before unless they are killed off early or get major rewrites. Except you. You lived when you weren't supposed to. Mr. Dearcon said it was an anomaly. He came up with a plan for you. My job is to make sure you play your part. I have to make sure you end up at the Centennial. I didn't know why, not until it was too late. Now we have to go back. I don't want to go, Ramona said. I came here to save you. If we don't go to the Centennial, then I've done what I was supposed to do. Phoebe continued to argue with her. Ramona was having none of it. That's rough for her, Isaac said. Did you call that? I don't remember. I shrugged my shoulders. It was going to be something like that. I mean, Carousel would love a special character to play with. Horror movies love messing with lady protagonists. I'm betting that if she really was unintended, that was a mouth-watering proposition. Like catnip for a horror movie, Isaac said. Yeah, I said. Although the real fridge horror is the part about how everyone in Carousel is from a storyline. We pretty much assumed that some were born here, but from the sound of it, Carousel brings over a lot more than just monsters and props from its worlds. Yeah, he said. Spooky. So that's like a big deal. Obviously, I said. You realize what the implication of that is, right? Yes, but I am having trouble putting it into words. Suddenly, Phoebe's gentle voice cut through our conversation. Your world is folded into Carousel too, she said. Riley fears the implications. Wait, Isaac said. Can't she hear us? Who are you talking to? Ramona asked. They had been arguing fiercely. I can see your ghost teammates talking to each other. Their lines appear on the script, Phoebe said. She must have had the premium script package. Most versions of the script are vaguer. Bobby's was apparently one step above subtitles. Riley is in the room? Ramona asked. You were listening to that whole conversation. We can leave, I said. I meant it, but, of course, who could predict Carousel? As I went to leave, something appeared from thin air. Silas, the mechanical showman, arrived, blocking the door. Welcome to Carousel, the town where movies come to life. The show's about to start, and you're in the front row, he said in a slightly warped mechanical voice. What the heck, I said. Come on up and get your tickets. The centennial celebration awaits. Ramona becoming a player was a curveball but a welcome one. I didn't predict what archetype she would be in the slightest. She pressed the red button and grabbed the handful of tickets as they came out. Suddenly, she grew weak in the knees, and her sister rushed to grab her before she fell. Silas disappeared, and I started reading her tropes on the red wallpaper. The hysteric. Minor archetype. You're the hysteric, a maelstrom of raw emotion and heightened sensitivity. In the face of terror, your reactions are not mere panic or willfulness, but a powerful force that can sway the very fabric of the narrative. Your heightened senses alert you to unseen dangers, and your frantic energy can be harnessed in moments of dire need. You are not afraid to go against the consensus. Where others see fear as a hindrance, you transform it into a weapon, steering the course of events with your visceral responses. Your stubbornness and strength of will are shields as strong as steel. But beware, for the line between harnessing your hysteria and succumbing to it is perilously thin. Will your raw emotional power be the key to survival, or will it lead you and your allies to the brink of madness? Base stats. Medal for feats of strength and offensive ability. 0. Moxie to make your performance convincing. 3. Hustle to be quick, deft, and to always hit your mark. 3. Savvy for intelligence, planning, and deduction. 3. Grit for durability, toughness, and endurance. 1. Plot armor. Mastering all 5 aspects of plot armor will make you a master of horror. 10. Totalable stats. Justice monsters. Type, buff. Archetype, hysteric. Aspect, defiant. Stat used, moxie. Violence boils just under the surface of some characters. Others are better trained at keeping their darker tendencies and the trauma that caused them hidden from view. But if no one that matters is looking, where's the harm in letting it out? When the user is alone with an enemy, they may drop their civil facade and reveal a normally hidden violent or malevolent nature. Buffs metal and grit. Could you imagine if the other mothers in the toss saw you now? Afraid for others. Type, buff. Archetype, hysteric. Aspect, craven. Stat used, moxie. Fear can be a chain around one's ankle or a sword in one's hand. It just depends on what you are afraid of and who you are afraid for. With this drop equipped, a previously fearful or anxious character may channel their fear for an ally into the will to act. Allows the user to use their moxie's metal in the pursuit of protecting a loved one until the character's loved one is safe or dead. Requires a strong bond between the characters. Sure, you're still afraid, but the enemy should be too. Pride before the fall. Type, rule. Archetype, hysteric. Aspect, defiant. Stat used, moxie. Sometimes, to be brave is not but a simple lack of humility. When the user triggers an omen intentionally out of coxareness or stubbornness, and this attitude carries forth into their character portrayal, they will guarantee themselves to be the target for second blood. How was I supposed to know what would happen? We told you. Before you get us killed. Type, rule. Archetype, hysteric. Aspect, defiant. Stat used, savvy. Many horror films would not have such disastrous endings if the characters in charge had made better decisions. A maverick's decision to diverge from the group or defy orders may be what keeps them alive. When the user splits the party under the pretense of believing the current course of action is a doomed plan, the group without the main viewpoint character will go off-screen except to show their deaths or milestones until the two groups' plot lines reconverge. When one group fails, the other group will be guaranteed some limited success and longevity. Players can't survive being in the failed group, though there will be consequences. One of us just made a really dumb decision. Well, that answered some questions. Before I could discuss the tropes or the archetype itself, the room went white with fog. I couldn't tell if I was falling or flying, but before I knew it, Isaac and I were alone outside in the grass, surrounded by an impenetrable wall of bright white fog. Though we could not predict why at the time, we would be trapped in that bubble of fog for what felt like days with nothing to do but talk. Even as we walked in circles, waiting for a path to open up, I did not start to understand what was happening, or what had been happening. I didn't understand, that is, until Isaac and I really got the chance to talk. Chapter 79 hours passed in that circle of fog. Days. What the hell is going on? Isaac screamed into the void. Hello? Riley, I think they lost the storyline and we're just stuck forever. Riley. I can't. Calm down, I said. It's ridiculous. The plot cycle still says it's the finale. Why would that not have changed? Think about it. That's what you said yesterday. Isaac said. Was it even yesterday? All I could see was light and a patch of grass under my feet. It was just Isaac and me, and there was nothing to do. Unlike previous ghostly waiting parties, time did not pass quickly. Isaac's theory that we were stuck here for eternity was slowly becoming more plausible. I had to ignore that possibility. If I was going to be stuck here, I might as well make it productive. I can see it, I said. I really can. A hysteric is driven by emotion. They aren't just scared. That's just part of what they are. I don't care, Isaac said. Will you stop playing the game for 10 seconds? What the hell is wrong with you? Hysteric, not hysteric, how does that matter now? It's all part of the same scam. The details don't matter. I don't care if they give her an archetype. I don't care if she is a demon or an NPC. It's all bull. I still don't trust her. I still think this is all an exercise in misery. I still think the Paragons are bastards and Carousel is the 11th circle of hell. You sit there just trusting everything in front of you. I can't believe I followed you. We're never getting out of here. Dying and becoming a ghost had a calming effect on me. Isaac, however, had moved past that stage. Trust has nothing to do with it, I said. If this is all a lie, and we're just in hell, that fucking sucks, but the moment you stop believing you can do something about it, the moment you give up, you lose any chance of a happy ending. I've seen enough. If you say you saw all of this in a horror movie, I swear to God I will find a way to hurt you, Isaac said. It's not about movies. It's not stories. It's life. Life sucks, but if you don't believe there's some way you can scrape out some semblance of happiness, you might as well be dead? Isaac said. We are dead. He started to laugh and laugh and laugh. Were you going to say we might as well be dead? Oh my God. This is hell and you are my personal devil. I knew when you would always tell us that playing the game was the way out, that we were just going to get stuck further in. We are trapped in quicksand and you kept telling us to wiggle a little more, like that would help us. I knew you were wrong. I knew you were just going to get me and Cassie hurt. Why didn't I stop us? Why didn't I just tell you that this was all a trap and we weren't doing anything to go along with it? Because I am a coward. I'm a coward. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I wasn't ready for this. Isaac didn't say anything more for a while. Where was this hostility coming from? He had been layabout for most of the tutorial, making quips about how pointless everything was, for sure, but every time he expressed his doubts, it was in the form of a lame joke. Now he suddenly wanted to make noise and gnash teeth. Whatever the case, I said, it's still worth thinking about. You don't mind me thinking about stuff, do you? He didn't answer at first. I expected some haughty answer, but he thought about it. It makes me nervous, he said gently. How does it make you nervous? I asked. Isaac shrugged his shoulders. I just feel like you are putting in more effort than this whole charade deserves. Makes me feel bad. Every instinct I have says that we should just refuse to go along with this whole thing. In the end, the joke is on us, why should we go along with it? This wasn't the first time Isaac had brought this up, though usually when he said it, he was, again, just joking. He believed, as we all sort of did, that this whole exercise, everything related to Carousel, was some kind of trick. When I engaged in solving the tutorial or pondering the reality of Carousel, he would go out of his way to be disinterested. Officially, when we find out this is all just some endless, pointless torture, I will tell whoever is involved that you were never fooled. You saw right through it all. Is that what you were hoping for? I asked. He started to laugh. That works. If you believe it's all a lie, you can never be fooled. I wasn't fooled. I never trusted anyone. I just can't figure out why I went along with it. How could I set myself up for this? If I had been alive, I might have been annoyed, but death, as I had learned over and over again, brought clarity, at least in this storyline. As a ghost, I was able to empathize with Isaac, mostly because I wished I was in his position. If Camden had been here to overthink things instead of me, I wondered if I would be able to lay back and crack jokes and act like I was too smart to be optimistic. But Camden wasn't here. I was the guy who had to think about everything from every angle and try to make sense of it all. I didn't have the privilege of being a skeptic. We sat in the grass, still surrounded by fog. The plot cycle had not moved in days. Weeks? I had no idea. Even as ghosts, we were going insane. I worried that our confinement would have us at each other's throats for all eternity. I could feel the tension rising. It's almost over, I said. That's all I can say. Yep, he said with a chuckle. The other shoe is about to drop, though. At least we might get an explanation. Probably. I decided to indulge him. How about the big reveal? What do you think it will be? Do you really think we've been in hell this whole time? You? I asked. I don't even want to guess, he said. Now that I'm thinking clearly, all I know is that the pursuit of understanding is a torture worse than hell. Whatever's coming, I'm ready. You think there's no way out? I asked. The tutorial means nothing. The through line is a sham? Saving Lillian Geist to get the true ending? It does seem a little inane, doesn't it? Yeah, Isaac said. I mean, if all we had to do was save Lillian Geist at the Centennial so that the timeline was corrected, why hide it like this? Why make us jump through hoops blindfolded? Where was our guy? Our guy? I asked. You know, in movies, he said. Where was our guy who was supposed to say, this is what's happening, this is how to solve it? It'll be really hard. Good luck. Our guy. That's what the Paragons should have done. It's almost like the whole point was to make us act without knowing what we were doing. Could have used a guy like that, I said. I did always think that when the Paragons showed up, one of them would reveal what this whole thing was about. They never did. Even though he was a ghost, I could still hear the crackle in his voice. He was afraid. We all go to different places when afraid. I tried to find answers. I threw myself into the tutorial, into the through line, in hopes of getting through it and rescuing Anna and Camden. Isaac ran from answers because he couldn't imagine a world where the answers were something he wanted to hear. Still, it was weird that he waited this long to try to hash it out. Maybe Ghost Isaac was bolder. Maybe he just sensed the end coming. Or maybe it was something else. Whatever the case, I said, I'll be happy just to know what the answer is. Isaac chuckled. Then maybe that's what you will never learn. There will always be one more storyline. One more mystery. Another and another. I think you want to find a way to make the numbers add up so bad that you might never have just considered that you have the wrong numbers. We had avoided this conversation for so long. What if everything was a lie? Wasn't that Jeanette's thesis that had gotten her killed? In life, we were too afraid to face the worst possibilities. As spirits, we could finally talk about them freely. So we did. The wrong numbers, you mean lies. We're being lied to. That's what you have to say? I said. The through line, Project Rewind, the tutorial, all lies. What does it matter what I have to say? Isaac asked. We die no matter what. That's what I figure. The only question is, who's going to be there laughing when we finally realize how pathetic we were for thinking we stood a chance? How many times have we used the phrase rats and a maze? Was he picking a fight? Well, if there was ever a time to have this conversation, it was then. The final battle of the storyline and tutorial itself was coming up sometime in the next millennia, and Carousel seemed to have stuck us together, leaving us without anything else to do. I took a deep breath. I was not some doe-eyed believer. I knew this whole place was some gruesome theater. Was he saying that I didn't know how foolish it was to believe everything would be okay? Don't confuse my pragmatism with optimism, I said. Somebody has to be the one to put our foot forward. The only thing I know to do is hope that I can figure this out. If the truth at the end is that the numbers don't add up, we don't lose anything for trying. What if we do? This place is a nightmare. Now that I'm dead, I finally have time to really think about this place. You know, Cassie and Kimberly and Antoine, they talk about this place like it's hell because of the gore and the misery. To me, it's hell because my one defense in life, my cynicism, is useless here. Distrusting everyone doesn't keep you safe when trusting was never an option. We know we're being tricked. We just don't know the punchline. Do you trust me? No. Isaac said. How can I trust you? How can I trust anyone? Used to be, the only people I knew were on my side were Cassie and Andrew, but Andrew's dead and I saw Cassie die too. How do I know the Cassie that came back is actually my sister? Don't get me wrong, I ignore that question just fine. I decided to go along with you guys because when a person gets scared, they've got to cling to the comforting truths. Now I'm dead and I don't need comfort right now. So I'm back to my old philosophy. It's all a lie. I just don't know which lie. Cassie and Isaac had it worse in so many ways than the rest of us. They never had one moment of normalcy. Camp Dyer had been our shelter in the storm. The Hughes siblings didn't have that. They had nothing to anchor themselves to. They had no image of Carousel in their mind that they could hold on to and tell themselves they understood. I laid back on the ground. I'm not naive, I said. I feel like I am being led around. I get sick to my stomach just thinking about all the hours I wasted trying to figure out what secrets about the tutorial or the throughline might be the ones that we need to know the most, only to find out most of that work was meaningless. The deeper truths feel so arbitrary that I start to wonder if I am just too stupid to figure it out. I kept looking for some fundamental thing to latch onto, something that would inspire people to sacrifice themselves for Project Rewind. But all we learn about are the guys Sir Ramona and I just have more questions. Where's the aha moment? He sat down next to me, and we stared into the bright fog that surrounded us. The plot cycle was still frozen. It didn't budge a hair. I never said you were naive, Isaac said. I just get mad when you take this obvious bullshit so seriously. I get angry that we don't have an option to just not care. We can't just opt out, you know? To wait until we know why we're doing stuff. I don't care what you say, the Paragons have been starving us for information. Maybe they're just puppets anyway. Even when they were pretending to be players, I'm pretty sure everything they said was scripted. Cassie told me not to say that because it might cause a fight, but you guys are just way too trusting. I hated when he said that. I had never been a trusting person. It's all a lie, I said, lying back on the grass. Damn right, Isaac said. It's all a lie. I know the Paragons are sketchy, but they're the friendliest faces I've seen around lately, I said. The paragons are full of it, Isaac said. When our heads are on the execution block, and one of those friendly faces is holding an axe, I am saying I told you so. I laughed. They weren't the ones with the axe, but he didn't know that. More time passed. Hours, days, weeks, I honestly couldn't tell. Ghosts don't have internal clocks. I only felt like our stay in Club Fog lasted somewhere between a few weeks and forever. I started trying to force the Centennial to start by sheer force of will, but I was not successful. I had no power here. Deathwatch showed me nothing. Why were we stuck there in the fog? All I could think about was the final battle. Carousel had decided to stick us in timeout at the worst moment. I laid my head back and tried to sleep there on the grass. As a ghost, I didn't feel like I was sleeping, but time passed, I thought. When I looked at the plot cycle, it was still stuck in the same place. I started to think about what Isaac was saying. Everything was a lie. He really thought he got the exclusive rights to that sentiment. To be fair, he was a comedian and comedians had a cynic aspect. Maybe he was a true cynic. That would explain why he wasn't that funny. Of course the truth was being hidden from us. That wasn't a unique thought. The geists were clearly important to Carousel. They were basically normal humans being used as pincushions. They were unique. They were special. So special that NPCs brought them up in conversation years after their deaths. So important that you could find books about them on park benches. Just lying around. And they were the subject of the thrill line? Did it make sense? If everything is a lie, then what's the lie? I asked. Hell if I know, Isaac said. No, I said. Sit up. Listen to me. Assume everything is a lie and then guess what the lie is. I'm there already, he said. What's the lie? What's the purpose? What has been accomplished with this whole thing? I can grant that this is odd. The Ramona thing is out of nowhere. The geists are interesting, I guess, but I'm not getting much to grasp onto as far as plots go. They're dead and we kind of understand that Bart made a deal, but nothing is gripping me about them yet. And I have tried. Isaac got up and took a deep breath. I can say anything and you won't be offended? No. Maybe. I don't know. Say it anyway, I said. The way we found the true versions of the stories was weird. They don't make sense, he said. I'm not saying it wasn't cool. The way you figured out what Jimbo Guy's murder weapon was, Cassie thought you were a genius. She was gushing. Then 10 minutes into the next movie, we are told what the murder weapon was. How lame is that? We didn't need that info. We would have found it out anyway. I had figured out that his murder weapon was the fire poker by looking through the old newspapers. It's a tutorial, I said. I figure they want to reward Detective Woe. He held up his hand to cut me off. But, whatever. I can accept that. Then when we were looking to do the same thing to get the third movie, I was thinking oh god, Riley's gonna do some National Treasure nonsense to bust this thing wide open and we're going to figure out what the buzz is on these geists and the founding of Carousel, and then you come up with some half-guess that Lillian Geist was at or near the original Centennial because you can put two dates together and bingo. You solved it again. A completely useless piece of trivia that we would learn later anyway. The first one I can grant kind of. The second one legitimately made me think you were in on the whole thing like you were an NPC. How could I defend that? It was an odd trigger for the omen of the third storyline. Sure, knowing that Lillian Geist was involved in the Centennial disaster in some way was nice, but Ramona would go on to tell us that anyway. I didn't say the Lillian Geist thing was genius. I just figured it was the clue that Constance was trying to get at and it worked. It's not like I'm going to look a gift horse in the mouth in our situation. He pointed at me. Exactly. I'm not trying to downplay your accomplishments here, bro. I'm saying that if everything is a lie, that's the lie. We were always going to figure out our way into the true version of the stories just in the nick of time. Guaranteed. It was all designed to make us think we had earned it. You try to fill in every blank you see. They tell you that you were such a bright boy, and of course, we believe them because we want to. Don't be mad. It did hit my pride a bit. I wished I had said it first so it would have been my idea. I'm not mad, I said. I'm not. That fits as well as any theory I had. The game was designed to make us think we were progressing. I can buy that. I gotta say though, if the fix was in on this tutorial, then why were the storylines so hard? We almost got flattened over and over. He nodded in agreement. I'm not saying the storylines were easy, he said. I didn't really do much, so they were kind of easy for me. Well, you're new, I said. You get a pass. What do you think? I shrugged my shoulders. Maybe they want. I don't know. Speaking of they, who's they? Who is behind it all? Is Carousel pulling all the strings? He threw his hands in the air. It's at least the Paragons. I never trusted them. I liked having a face to go along with my suspicion though. That was nice. Blaming Carousel itself feels like screaming into the wind. For a moment I stopped and laughed. I took a deep breath and thought for a moment. If everything's a lie. Here's the lie, I said. The ultra-secret through line, the hidden current running underneath it all. The story that if you even learn a fraction of it, adds itself to your quest log automatically. It's about the Geist. The Geist family. Really? The most powerful and famous family in Carousel. How could the throughline be about the most talked about people in the whole mythos? I learned about the Geists before Project Rewind. It was only a little, but still. That's the subject of the big secret? How was anybody not on the throughline if it was about the Geists? Isaac nodded. That's a good question. I didn't think about that. Anna Mercer. Anna Halley. All families from your war stories. Yet you weren't on the throughline yet, but you interacted with plenty of big names. We sat in silence for a moment, our minds really beginning to raise. If everything's a lie, here's the lie, he said. The Paragons pretend to be players. The stranger was supposedly a player, but he was using tropes that were not on the red wallpaper. That trope that made it so you couldn't remember what he looked like? That was equipped the whole time. That was true. The stranger was a player in the 10-second game storyline. Even when rewatching the movie on the red wallpaper, I couldn't recall what he looked like from scene to scene. So maybe it's a little flavor, I said. They say those are the only tropes they have, but it's a white lie they use to play their part. Still a lie. If they couldn't fake what's on the red wallpaper, why would we ever believe anything we saw on it? I didn't like that. Filling in the blanks usually didn't involve making new blanks, but we were having a thought experiment. Assume it was all a lie and go from there. I've got another, I said. Let's hear it, Isaac said. If it's all a lie, here's the lie. The 10-second game storyline was not actually made just for us, I said. Who said it was made for us? The Paragons either directly said it or implied it, I can't remember. Maybe I said it, and they confirmed it. It was supposedly punishment, you know, for cheating or something. To balance the game. So that's why it went off the rails. It wasn't a real game? Well, maybe. I meant because the ritual, the 10-second game ritual for talking to ghosts, that definitely wasn't just for us. Ramona used the same thing with the bell in the flashback. That flashback supposedly took place in a previous game from the current one before any of us got the Carousel. I kind of dismissed it because maybe Carousel built the storyline around the ritual. I don't know. Anyway, that's the lie. Oh, yeah, Isaac said. It was also used by other players. I mean, the ghost man, whose name escapes me, said other players visited him. That meant previous players also had the 10-second game ritual. I couldn't remember how true that was. Well, they might have used the reply, the departed board game to communicate with him instead. That one would work, kind of. It's just more luck-based. Nope, he said. Everything is a lie. Of course. That's the lie, I said. But why lie about the reply, the departed storyline being rebooted? What does that accomplish? I looked up at the sky and thought for a moment. What was achieved by the introduction of the 10-second game storyline that wouldn't have been achieved by the original reply, the departed storyline? We did end up playing both, after all. If we never got the 10-second bell for the updated ritual, we probably wouldn't have gotten to speak to Jedediah directly. We would have missed out on the flashbacks, I said. Which one is Jedediah? Isaac asked. Jimbo, I said. Right. The ghost. So, what did we learn that was so important? Wait, Isaac said. He told us about Ramona, right? Well, he told you about Ramona while I hid in the other room, but I saw the flashbacks. I shook my head. No, we were first told about Ramona by Madame Celia, the psychic. Would that be the psychic paragon? He asked with a grin. You've got me there, I said. Those paragons are behind it all. I'm serious, he said. It never sat right that they used tropes to manipulate us. They could have just asked us nicely. Why use tropes? They knew we would play along. At the time, I marveled at how the tutorial forced us along with those tropes. It made sense for new players. That's what I told myself. The team leader Paragon, the one who worked for the government, she used a trope to make us do what she wanted. Yeah. Unnecessary. The stranger. He met us at the diner. He used a trope there, too, didn't he? It was a weird one, wasn't it? Isaac asked. Made my head feel funny. It was a trope that Antoine and I immediately deduced forced us not to believe whatever the stranger said. If he said water was wet, we wouldn't believe it. We told ourselves it didn't affect us because we already knew what was true. What had he told us all that time ago? As I remembered that meeting, a dam burst in my mind. I started thinking that his trope didn't work on ghosts because as I remembered what he told us, I started to think that much of what he said was the truth, and we were forced not to believe it. How much of what he told us was actually true? If that trope worked the way I thought it did, he could tell us the flat-out truth, and we would refuse to believe it. We thought he was just doing his normal performance that every new player had to watch. Much of what he had said was nonsense, but if he layered in a few key phrases, he had told us so many things that, if we refused to believe them, we would never be able to see even an obvious trap. That was the lie. Chapter 80. What had the stranger said to us? What truths had we been forced to be skeptical of? I remembered he said this was a trap. He said it was a trick. He said those things to our faces. He said a lot of things. Which ones were truths masquerading as inane rantings I couldn't say. We thought we weren't affected. We believed we knew what he was talking about, that Carousel was a trap, and that we had been tricked. Suddenly, the veil lifted from my eyes, and I realized that the stranger was telling us that we were currently being trapped, that some other trap was in the works. But what? Isaac started to laugh. Does that mean that Project Rewind was bullshit? Don't say that. I screamed. I got up and paced around. No, why would it be a trap? It already had us. What was the point of Carousel tricking us again? Isaac continued to laugh. He lay back on the grass. For the fun of it, he said. Isn't it obvious? To give you hope and watch it melt away. I couldn't believe that, I wouldn't believe that. No. The guys didn't fit the through line described in the atlas, and the tutorial was askew in some way I could not determine. That was the trap. I refused to believe that this thing Project Rewind so many of us had put our hopes in had been a ruse from the beginning. That didn't make sense. Carousel was harsh and evil, but rarely mean. I sat and thought for some explanation that would make the world upright again. None came. Not at first. Hello, boys, a man said. I hadn't noticed him arrive. It was Moonlight Morrow. Even as a ghost, my blood froze in my veins. He stood among us in the patch of grass surrounded by fog. He was still alive. See, Isaac said, pointing to Moonlight. He can talk to ghosts, but he has no drop for that on the red wallpaper. He's been deceiving us this whole time. Moonlight watched my eyes as if looking for a reaction. He had been wearing a hat, but he took it off to talk to us. When I gave no response, he spoke. I do have tropes for communicating with ghosts. I am the deep-rooted paragon, after all. I hate to disappoint you, Isaac. I don't need a trope to speak to the dead. Trust me when I say I earned my archetype the old-fashioned way. Part of me wanted to theorize on that, but I had bigger fish to fry. Death, I said. It frees us from tropes that controlled us, didn't it? Moonlight looked at me with a small smile. Was he happy with what I had said? Was he messing with me? Not all death frees you from what bound you in life, but this one did. Yes, Moonlight said. You never really know yourself until you've seen the other side, I've found. Death. Were we set up to die precisely so that our existence as spirits could give us the clarity to see through the deception? So that's the game, huh? I asked, seething. We discover the truth too late. Just soon enough to know that something was coming, some grand humiliation. Moonlight shook his head. You're the player. In Carousel, the player chooses the game, Moonlight said. This scheme, using paragons to manipulate players. It was artless. Carousel would know better. I froze. What? I asked. Carousel would know better. Does that mean? Yes, he said before I could finish my sentence. This was not done by Carousel, but Carousel is no man's fool. Moonlight started to walk. The fog cleared a path for him. Project Rewind, what a wonderful ploy, he said. Powerful. So much narrative force your homeworlders created with that plan. So well executed. By the time the narrators figured it out, it had so much momentum they couldn't stop it. Truly, a thing to behold. I thought the glory days of the players of the game at Carousel were behind us. It turns out, they may just be beginning. Wait. Project Rewind, I said. It's real? Please. I felt my throat clench as I waited for his answer. A group of players defying the heavens and other forces to give themselves a second shot at the impossible? Under the noses of every narrator who might seek to stop them? It is something worth believing in. I give you my word. That was not the trap, but there was a trap. I felt a surge of emotion well up in me. I cried just at the words. I needed to hear that. I couldn't help it. I needed to believe he was telling the truth. Why lie at this late hour? Even if everything is a lie, that couldn't be the lie. I wouldn't believe it. Camden and Anna had died giving us the atlas so we could learn of Project Rewind. It couldn't be a lie. But what was the lie? Isaac was awfully quiet. He kept a smirk on his lips. He needed to doubt what Moonlight was saying. He felt more comfortable in a world where he had a fix on things. What is going on? I asked. Moonlight looked at me with pity, but he did not answer my question. I'm supposed to ask you to accompany me to my death scene. You see, Roderick Gray sees that some camp counselor is putting a certain flask into the time capsule. He makes a move to steal it, thinking he will summon that curse again, but I catch him in the act and what do you know, the flask activates itself, as has been foreshadowed. In the ensuing chaos, he kills me and stuffs me in the one place he thinks no one will look for 100 years. The time capsule, I said. Your body was in the time capsule. The storylines of the supposed tutorial had happened in reverse chronological order. Everything we saw was time loop shenanigans. The real truth was in the past, that much was clear. Now I wondered why all of the theatrics. Why was any of this done? You already figured that out, did you? He will be pleased you took his little throwline so seriously. I had thought about this a lot. A whole lot. I didn't know specifics. I knew you were in there, your body. The scene we were forced to watch of Mayor Gray opening the capsule with his whole confused and terrified act. That was because he knew that in the true course of events, he was the one who buried it, right? Time was broken. The loop kept rubbing it in his face, haunting him. 3 years from now in 1995, when the flood happens for the second storyline, the real version, the time capsule is unearthed and warped by the water. Your soul escapes and possesses him again. That's the actual end, right? Moonlight smiled. I suppose that means you don't need to come see what happens to me. There are more pressing places for you to be. He waved his hand and a path opened in the fog. I stared in the direction the path led. Why would you be helping us? I asked. Moonlight thought for a moment. You see, they went too far. tied your strings too tight in hopes of achieving their ends. Carousel didn't like that. That's why I could lend a hand. Help you help yourself. I am the mayor of Carousel. I serve the people, not the narrators. Death does not pick favorites. He began to walk away. He was not bound by the fog like we were. As he left, he said, "The train is not yet at the station, Mr. Lawrence. You still have time, if just barely. Good luck." Isaac and I ran. The plot cycle was moving again and we were certain that the final battle was underway. "What are we doing?" Isaac asked. "You're trusting him just like that? Have you learned nothing?" I shook my head, not completely sure. "No. I just look at the options we have and realize we only have one play to make," I said. "We obviously have to beat the storyline or else, you know. We're forever young." Isaac asked. "Basically. Our only option is to win the storyline but not get the true ending. We have to let the diecast kill Lillian Geist. I don't know why, but that does seem like the only thing we have control over. And if I'm wrong, we just run the tutorial again. It was made to be repeated, right? That was my safety net. If we blew up the tutorial at the last minute, we could just do it all over again, this time knowing what would happen. Moonlight is a paragon. How is he different than any of the others?" Isaac screamed. "He wasn't, but we were put in a position to either trust him or trust the paragons, who we knew for sure manipulated us. Something I couldn't say to him or any of the others was that I liked this sudden U-turn because it actually felt like a choice. There were two options and it was up to us to decide. The whole tutorial had us moving in one straight line. Sure, the storylines could be hard, but I never felt like we were being proactive or making our own choices. I felt like we were being led along and jerked around. I finally had a choice to make. Walk down the path we were given or burn it to the ground. In my heart, I chose the second one. I chose before Moonlight even showed up. The moment I felt the stranger's trap lift, I knew I was going to do whatever it took to bring this whole scheme to a shrieking halt even if it ended up being the wrong decision. We've been fooled, Isaac. That's all I know for sure. We don't have to trust anyone. If everything is a lie, let's pick a different lie." Isaac laughed. We continued running past buildings, rushing to the downtown as fast as possible. We had finally made it to the Centennial. Didn't even have time to stop and smell the funnel cakes. As soon as we arrived, we passed screaming NPCs. Time was not on our side. We were manipulated to arrive late, as that was the only way the diecast would already be there. I had missed part of the movie on Death Watch. What I saw on screen was Antoine and a very injured Cassie struggling to find Roderick Gray. Moonlight must have already been dead. So, we need Lillian Geist to die. Isaac asked as he ran right through a family of 4, causing them to inhale sharply. The whole thing we were here to prevent Lillian Geist dying at the Centennial instead of later, that's what we are here to prevent now? Yep, I said. And our living allies are all trying to prevent it and we have no way to tell them to stop? Yep. Oh, he said. Good. I bet you're really hoping the Lillian Scorned contingency fails, huh? Oh damn. I had forgotten about the Lillian Scorned contingency. Many scenes before, back in Rebirth. What are you trying to explain to them? Isaac asked as he lay on the red hand chair back in my character's house. This was after we were ghosts, but before the manor blaze. I stood in the middle of the living room playing the most frustrating game of charades imaginable. I was invisible and trying to communicate a fairly complicated idea to the living. They were eating popcorn and throwing it at me. Ramona watched the buffoonery from afar. Lillian was supposed to survive, I said using flashback revelation. It was a short little statement I found. I couldn't even remember when I had said it in the current storyline. They looked at me like I was making no sense. Right, Lillian wasn't supposed to die, Kimberly said. She was supposed to die 3 years later in the second storyline. What are you trying to tell us? The problem was that I was trying to explain to them what Lillian's tropes were, but I had never actually told them. It was a bad habit, but in that case, It was totally justified because I only saw the tropes minutes before she died, and at that point, who cared? I had noticed something odd about Lillian Guy's build. She was high-level and had some very powerful tropes, but she didn't need any of them. The players didn't have to fight her and all she did was kill Dr. Hallie. Why did she need such lethal tropes just for that? Later, when I realized that she must have been present at the Centennial, I realized why she was built like a monster. I was so frustrated. Luckily, the group was in the right zip code. I just had to let them talk until they figured out what I was talking about. Maybe the secret is to lure her away? Ant-Man said. I moved back and forth, a communication that meant maybe. They knew that wasn't what I was after. She starts innocent, then she becomes baptized in blood. She's a survivor, I said, recalling a conversation I had with Kimberly about her character in the fake movie we made. Kimberly conveyed what I said. She fights back? Ant-Man said. I moved to signal yes. We have to get her to fight back? Ant-Man asked. Yes again. We continued until I had gotten them to come to the following conclusion. Lillian is a monster too. The die-cast is to blame. Oh, Cassie said. Lillian Guy's revenge. We have to get her to take revenge on the die-cast. One more emphatic yes and the Lillian-scorned contingency was born. Lillian was a pattern killer. All we had to do was show her a part of the pattern. Her woman-scorned drop was the next part of the puzzle. If she realized the die-cast caused her injuries, she should get a buff to fight him herself. Dr. Hallie turned her into a monster. We didn't know what Dinah was working on in the background. This was our backup in case the initial plans failed. We would get Lillian to fight back. The tropes lined up so well that I assumed it was designed to be used this way. Lillian would act in her own defense, using the monstrous abilities her mutation had given her. She would save herself. That was the plan. It would be a battle of mutant versus undead juggernaut, and our fate would hang in the balance. Now that we wanted her to die, it was a huge obstacle. Odds were, Lillian would have a fair chance at surviving the altercation as long as she fought back. It was a pretty good improvisation. If she held off the die-cast and the others managed to defeat him using Dinah's whole love is stronger than death nonsense, we would have gotten the true ending. And our fate, in some gruesome way, would be sealed. Maybe when we get there you'll have time to stop them from activating Lillian? Isaac said. But of course, it didn't work out that way. When we got to the celebration, Dinah was pleading with the die-cast while the ghost of Gale Zaragoza fought to wrestle control of his old body. They were doing well. I couldn't see Kimberly, Ant-Man, or Cassie with my eyes, but I saw Lillian Guy sitting on the ground crying. I was able to use my Deathwatch screen on the red wallpaper. In the distance, I saw a woman in a witch costume running away with her teenage sister. It looked like Ramona had decided to leave Lillian to her fate this time around. I couldn't blame her. She had lived with that regret for too long. Her sister would live this time. I pushed away questions about what Ramona was and how she was involved because as I ran to find Lillian, I saw Kimberly arrive at her side on screen. It didn't take long for me to find them in real life too. Kimberly knelt down, talking to Lillian and comforting her. We were too late. Chapter 81. As I raced to undo what might have been the biggest mistake of my life or death, all I could think about was a simple question. What do you do when you are missing information? Over the past months, both in and outside of storylines, I had been asking myself that question constantly. The tutorial, if that was even the real name for the obstacle course that we had been run through, had felt like walking through mud blindfolded with only faint whispers that we were making progress. I latched on to whatever details I could that made me feel like I was actually accomplishing something. What was the plot of the tutorial? Looking back at it, it was a fractured timeline resulting in a time loop. How many times had I seen that in a movie or television show? It was a classic setup that allowed storytellers to do absurd things without ever having to stick to any sort of grounded rule set. Time was broken and so were the rules. Have fun. It was a simple enough plot, though, as Isaac had said. It was weird the Paragons didn't just tell us that was what was going on. They were unscripted, right? As we explored the Centennial, the true sequence of events was laid out for us. That was a key element of a fractured timeline story. The character always has to know what a fixed timeline looks like. The Geist family all died in 1984 in a manor fire caused by the diecast, a spirit of vengeance. They all died horrific deaths at night, except of course, for Lillian Geist and her uncle Jedediah. Jedediah, seeing Lillian's injuries from the fire, had enlisted the help of a mad scientist by the name of Hallie. That scientist transformed her into a monster. 8 years later, in 1992, Lillian Geist escaped the mad scientist, returned to her uncle, and murdered him with a fire poker as a thank you for her transformation. We summoned his spirit once for a chat. She returned to the mad scientist and his sedatives. She lived that way until 1995 when she once again broke free from the mad scientist and killed him before following him into the afterlife in the jaws of a giant killer frog. I knew that to be the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes in the second storyline. I even had a hand in helping it happen. But there were conflicting reports on the death of Lillian Geist. This was another staple of broken timeline stories, a paradox. When we met Ramona, the first thing she told us about was how this woman, a woman that we knew to be Lillian Geist, had been killed in 1992 at the original Centennial. We knew that was an impossibility. But I was overcome with relief because I finally knew there was a paradox. Lillian Geist had 2 canon deaths. That simply was not possible. I knew that this paradox was the reason for the time loop. It had to be. We knew how the time loop was accomplished behind the scenes. Ramona Mercer had been initiating a storyline that took place the day before the Centennial. She had done this every day on repeat for an unfathomable amount of time, granting her a very long life, to say the least, and plunging Carousel into a time loop where the days moved forward but the events stayed the same. Carousel never got to see its Centennial again, and as time passed, the ridiculousness of this scenario began to cause problems. Somehow, her not being a player allowed her to fill this role without getting killed. It was like she was placed there for us to find. Was she another paradox? I had no idea. I wouldn't for a long time. Ramona was one of a dozen things I could not reconcile about this tutorial. The arbitrariness of what happened between storylines, the unhelpful answers from the paragons, and their constant positive reinforcement, all ate at me. Every time I expressed my doubts, they patted us on the back and told us what a good job we were doing. At what? The storylines were a pain and a half, but most of our efforts were like jogging in a train. It didn't matter how fast we ran, we weren't really the ones driving. But of course, I ignored my doubts because what other options did we have? A time capsule buried during the original Centennial was dug up every single day, and no one knew how it got there. This was classic broken timeline shenanigans. It was an artifact from the true version of events. Fixing the paradox of Lillian Geist's 2 deaths was something I could really sink my teeth into, so I embraced it with all my heart. The paradox was the problem, and I knew the solution. Make sure the timeline went according to plan. Lillian Geist was supposed to die by a frog bite in 1995, not be beheaded by a rusted piece of metal in 1992. Saving her from the diecast was the solution. I fixated on it, and I focused on it, and I devoted every single piece of myself toward it. It wasn't until I died and suddenly the Paragon's veil of influence lifted away from my mind like chewing gum being scraped from the inside of my skull that I started to question if forward really was the only direction we could go. Moonlight Moro gave us some vague comments to chew on, but ultimately, the realization that our free will had been manipulated was a chilling dagger to my spinal cord. Choice was a common theme of Carousel. The illusion of choice was all around, but magical manipulation felt different. It scared the daylights out of me. So I returned to the questions I had been asking. What do you do when you are missing information? The tutorial was odd, but if there was some horrible consequence to fixing the paradox and obtaining the true ending, I didn't know what that was. Faced with a choice of continuing down the path we had been tricked into or just destroying it all, the choice was easy. There was a chance that the heavy-handedness by the Paragons was perfectly normal, and we were blowing up our best chance at beating the Thrline and leaving Carousel. It was possible, but the one thing we knew about the tutorial was that you could repeat it and try again. Heck, I didn't even know how obtaining the true ending could be a bad thing, except for the fact that we were manipulated into doing it. I knew in my soul that if we were going to beat Carousel, we weren't going to do it blindfolded, so the decision was simple. We would ensure that we did not achieve the true ending. We would not fix the paradox. We would not march blindly toward whatever end we were approaching. How we were going to accomplish that, after having worked so hard to keep Lillian Geist alive, I had no idea. It didn't matter. We had to try, and I was thrilled because whatever resulted from ruining the true ending, it would be a choice we made. And that had to matter. _. Kimberly and the monstrous Lillian were back off screen for a moment. Before I could even yell with flashback revelation, Kimberly pointed to the diecast and said something. Why did she have to have such a high moxie? On screen. Lillian looked confused at first. She saw the buildings and booths around the Centennial burning, and the fire reflected in her crazed eyes. Suddenly, she understood. You. She screamed. It's you. My Death Watch screen on the red wallpaper flashed back. There was some fancy editing between shots of Lillian lying on the floor of the burning mansion staring up on the diecast in that same mansion. It gave the impression that she had seen him on the day the manor burned, even though she didn't really. The Lillian-scorned contingency was working. Lillian Geist was no longer the gasping young woman who had been burned in the manor blaze. It had been 8 years for her. 8 years of mutation and experimentation. What remained of her was a true force to be reckoned with. She was almost as high of plot armor as the diecast. With her tropes, she was even stronger, at least physically. Of course, there was a catch. She was only strong against enemies who had harmed her in the past. Her fragile psyche prevented her from being a real threat to the average passerby. But the diecast was not a passerby. The diecast had burned her. You killed my family, she screamed. You did this to me. The wriggling worms that had been grafted onto her face writhed and rattled to punctuate her scream. She was no longer a human, and she meant to prove it. She attacked. Her woman-scorned trop must have activated because her plot armor jumped up 7 points. You're the reason they did this to me. She screamed as she tackled the diecast to the ground. I'm a monster because of you. The diecast tried to throw her, but she grabbed his arm and, with screaming effort, snapped it backward. The roided-up monster Lillian might have been a real contender. Everything was doomed. We were too late. The diecast eventually managed to throw Lillian back into Dinah. Dinah had been trying to help her ghostly husband regain control of his old body. They had been making real strides. Dinah landed on the ground. She seemed fine, but one of the long, smoky tendrils of the spirit controlling the diecast reached up to a large hit the ball game. Suddenly I heard a bolt snap. The entire tower with a bell at the top fell to the ground. With a loud, dinging sound, Dinah's head was flattened. She was dead. That wasn't good. We wanted Lillian dead and the diecast defeated. It looked like we would have the opposite. Gale screamed out at the sight of Dinah's death, losing whatever control he had over his old body. Without Dinah's sweet nothings, he was ejected off his body and the spirit reigned once again. Lillian was all that stood against him. She and the diecast squared off. I hoped the diecast could kill her with some combination of brute force and bad luck, but I had forgotten that Lillian had the trop called animals are psychic, which gave her preternatural instincts. She could dodge any bad luck that came her way. A propane tank zoomed through the air like a missile. She dodged it. She ran on all fours and jumped 20 feet in the air. An electric go-kart from the go-kart track zoomed by with no driver and sparks flying out of its motor. It had no chance of hitting her. Luckily, the diecast was not without his own physical prowess. He managed to catch her in the side of the head with his lead pipe when she was dodging a live wire that danced around on the ground. The pipe hit her with a loud, satisfying thwack. The diecast was on her. His hands were around her throat. She had broken his arm, But he was undead and the tendrils of the spirit of vengeance made him practically invincible. She wasn't down, but things were looking hopeful. And then, I heard the snarling. A large dog, a great beast, jumped from nowhere and clamped down on the die-cast's arm. The dog was dragging on him with force and power. The die-cast had to let go of Lillian. He couldn't shake the dog. That wasn't surprising. The dog, after all, was undead. Bobby jogged into view moments later. On screen. He stood next to me and said, "A few years ago, a home invader shot one of my dogs. Thought I would pay him a visit. And then it hit me. Bobby's license. It gave him the right to use the Cole's dogs from the permanent vacancy storyline. It never said it only applied to the living ones. One of them had been Ghost zombified when Bradley Spires killed it. If there was any storyline where a ghost dog could get some play, it was this one. The dog held the die-cast's attention absolutely. Bobby and I went off-screen. He smiled at me, obviously proud of his impressive improvisation. What a terrible moment for Bobby to save the day. For a moment, I almost scolded him for bringing in a ghost dog he hadn't set up in the story previously, but I realized quickly that our final score was irrelevant. Dinah reappeared, this time as a ghost, hand in hand with Gale, her movie husband's spirit. Together, they worked to free Gale's body from the spirit that bound it. In a bit of luck, Dinah was almost more useful as a ghost. She and her love interest made tear-filled go-go eyes and held each other as they attempted to fight off the tendrils of the die-cast. Lillian clawed at the body. The dog was nearly ripping his arm off. We were winning. That was good. Lillian was going to survive. That was bad. On the red wallpaper, I saw, to my horror, Antoine and Cassie, who was having trouble breathing from some old smoke damage she had gotten somewhere. Roderick Gray was turning tail and running. They had the flask. The fresh cement being used to erect the Bartholomew Guy statue next to the now-buried time capsule was still liquid enough to pour into a flask. My teammates were about to seal the deal. We were actually doing really well. Isaac was cackling. I had to act. What could I do? I had no lines for flashback revelation to describe what needed to happen. I had one option. Bobby. I screamed. He looked at me startled by the fact that I wasn't smiling at our winning efforts. Lillian has to die, I said. This was all a trick. He looked at me like I hit 3 heads. What are you talking about? He asked. She's supposed to live. To die in the second storyline. That was what this was all about. How was I supposed to give him the same revelation Isaac and I had? I tried my best. Remember the stranger? I said. He nodded, still unsure of what I was wanting. He told us this was a trap, but we didn't believe him, not the right way. We thought we knew what he was talking about. He was using that weird trap, you know the one? Bobby thought back. I saw confusion spread on his face. He must have been realizing something too. He was a ghost, after all. He fell to his knees. Why are you? What does it mean? He asked. What is happening with my head? You're realizing you were under the effect of a trap, I said. The true ending to the story is a trap somehow. I don't know how, but you have to believe me. He sat back, dazed, possibly thinking through all of the things that my adulterating trap had caused. How many things had we overlooked because we were forced to doubt this could all be a trap? The whole tutorial took on a new light. Bobby, I said. We don't have time for this. As I spoke, I heard a loud sound accompanied by a blinding light. The spirit of vengeance, the creator of the die-cast, had been split from Gale Zaragoza's body. Dinah and zombie Gale possessed by Gale were having a weird romantic moment. We had one. I saw Antoine filling the flask with wet cement to rid us of it for good. And in doing so, we were going to fail. Bobby. I screamed. Have your dog kill Lillian before the movie ends. Do it now. Bobby shook his head. I need time to think. I don't understand. Bobby, you have to trust me. Isaac stepped in. Bobby, if we are wrong, there are no consequences. We know that the tutorial can be replayed until you get the true ending, but if we are right, we have no idea what might happen to us. It was always the strongest argument in the fail-on-purpose plan. Bobby seemed to think so too. He stood and called to his dog without speaking. The ghostly hound stood at attention and looked at his master. Without hesitation, it jumped at Lillian Geist's throat. As it tore her flesh, I really hoped we weren't wrong about this one. Lillian was so strong because of her woman scorned drop. That applied to the diecast, but not to Bobby's dog. Her stats dropped when fighting against it. She screamed in anguish. Dinah and Gail turned and yelled at Bobby. But it didn't matter. Just as the needle on the plot cycle clicked over to the end, Lillian fell dead. Tilde. There was a flash of light. "What did you do, Bobby?" Dinah screamed. She was alive again. We had beaten the storyline. I looked at my hands. Flashing and alive. We were out of the storyline. I was back in my hoodie. Oh, how I had missed its soft embrace. "Don't yell at him," I said. I asked him to. From the distance, Auntie Oni arrived, confused to see the dead Lillian Geist. "We failed," he said. "I thought we were doing well." He cursed. I couldn't explain it to them all at once. There was one thing I thought that might shine light on things. "Dinah," I said. "Do you still have that tape you stole from the carriage that picked us up?" She reached into her purse that she used her luggage tag on. "Yeah," she said. "Have you listened to it?" I asked. She shook her head. I was tempted a few times, but I could never find a tape player. I grabbed the tape from her hands. It was unassuming. Made from white plastic. Everyone was there with me. They gathered close. "We were told by Carousel to listen to this tape," I said. "It was on your stealing trop, remember? It said of fun listening or something, right?" Dinah nodded. "Then, we were told by Constance, the librarian, the paragon," Isaac interrupted. "That we should not listen to it because Carousel would be angry. We would steal Carousel's thunder, yada yada. We obeyed because we thought she was smart. Because we trusted her. I think she used some kind of drop to control us. I remember thinking that. Better listen to the smart lady." The silence as they considered what I had said was deafening. "Here," I said, retrieving my off-brand Walkman. I took out the headphones so that the audio would play out loud. "I think we should listen to it." I put the tape in, rewound it all of the way to the beginning, and pressed play. The tape came to life with a familiar voice. We all listened intently. Tilde. "Greetings. I am Silas Dearcon, your narrator through 3 separate tales of horror that may not be so separate after all. In the stories I have before you this evening, the people of the town of Carousel are anxiously awaiting its centennial celebration. However, time has twisted into a nightmarish loop where all known things become unknown, forcing its residents into a bizarre reality where every day is the day before its anniversary. As dawn's first light creeps over the horizon, the cursed history of Carousel unravels. A death that was never meant to be has shattered the threads of fate in this humble little town. Now, horrifying lab experiments are lurking beneath the streets, and ghostly apparitions are whispering secrets of the past to the players of a vintage board game. The curse, more than just disembodied magics, is harnessing fate itself and seeks blind revenge, trapping the townspeople in an unending cycle of terror. At the heart of this mystery lies the enigmatic Geist family, whose darkest day holds the key to breaking the loop. Will Carousel break free from this endless eve or remain forever on the cusp of a celebration that will never come? Step into the twilight of Carousel, where destiny stands still, horrors lurk beneath the streets, and the eve is eternal. Welcome to the Eternal Eve. Silas' voice cut out and a polite, well-spoken woman started to speak. The Eternal Eve through line begins with 3 bespoke centennial storylines centered on the Geist family. With these 3 stories completed to satisfaction, you will be signed on in the employ of one of Carousel's most beloved narrators, Silas Dearcon. Mr. Dearcon will send his players on an unguided quest to locate the fabled missing Geist storylines. To join the Eternal Eve, please keep listening after the chime as you make your way to the Carousel downtown. As always, be sure to keep your eyes peeled as you go because the town you see might not be the one you know. Now, onto the featured trail line. A chime rang out. Then, it started playing the recording we had heard before. "Ah, good evening, my esteemed guests," boomed Carlisle's voice. It had been so long since I had heard it. I stopped the tape. Angman cursed. Isaac clapped. "I don't know what it means, but I am excited." In the distance, a robotic voice told us we had won a ticket, but we were not so concerned.